Hi, everyone. This is John Panker with Tech Target, your moderator today for our discussion around the logistics industry, talking specifically about innovations in the supply chain. And this is, of course, our latest edition of Digital Beats. Pleasure to have you here. Let me get us kicked off by introducing our two guests. First, we've got Nidhi Gupta. And Nidhi is the CEO and co-founder of Portcast. If you are not familiar with Portcast, they do some really interesting work, specifically about looking at predictive modeling around how cargo moves around the world and using some of this data to help advise decisions specific to the logistics industry. Nidhi, it is great to have you here.
Thank you, John. It is great to be here as well.
And also joining us today from Alibaba Cloud is Ken Xu. Ken is the solution architect who works across a few industries. They include media, gaming, and logistics. Thanks for joining us today, Ken.
Yeah, hi everyone. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right, I want to get us started by talking about something that is very top of mind right now. We know with what happened in the Suez Canal that there have been disruptions to the supply chain that have had ripple effects across the world. I think the incident in the Suez Canal cost an estimated nearly $10 billion worth of trade disruption each day. So my question first to you, Nidhi, is how can technology play a role to mitigate the impact of supply chain disruptions?
Yeah, thank you, John. I mean, it's been really interesting and played on the world stage, what we saw at Suez Canal. But I have to say, disruptions have been a norm in supply chains and are likely to stay a norm. We've had cyclones which have disrupted port operations for almost a week and more. We've had the port explosion at Beirut. And, even though we did not realize cargo disruption did happen, ships, detoured, did not go to Beirut at that time. Brexit more recently also caused congestion at the UK ports, and then there's Suez Canal. So, from our perspective, this is a given now. Disruptions are going to happen, and no one's going to know what's going to happen where. So the impact for the supply chains, especially as globalized as they are now, is definitely delays. When we're in a cab and there's a traffic congestion, we can actually quantify and tell our friends when we're going to actually arrive and how late we're going to be. Think about that at the global scale with global supply chains and millions of cargo around the world. All of these disruptions are creating impact in terms of delays, but also these further blockages or these ripple effects, like you said, at other ports downstream, or the ships then have to skip the ports, etc. The other knock-on effect is on the whole global shipping capacity as well as air cargo capacity. So crunch that's there because companies have to figure out how they move the cargo around, as well as the equipment, the assets. So what technology can do is really enable proactive and predictive exception management and help deal with risks better. Of course, no one can predict if a Suez Canal is going to happen, but once it happens, where in the supply chain is there the impact, and quantify that in real terms, what that impact is like in terms of delays or in terms of impact to the customer. And then technology can allow scenario planning, like what rerouting options should we take? What are the other modes of transport? How do we deal with it better to have least impact on the bottom line and on our customer satisfaction? So this is exactly what we at Portcast are doing in terms of enabling predictive visibility and capacity management, taking into account external risks which are happening in the supply chain.
Interesting insights. Ken, what's your perspective here from Alibaba Cloud? How is technology enabling us to cope with some of these disruptions, not just the Suez Canal? Nidhi cited multiple disruptions that organizations have been dealing with in their supply chain over the course of the last year or so. How does technology come in and help us all out?
Yeah, so first of all, I totally agree with Nidhi that this type of disruptions happen everywhere, not just in the Suez Canal. And particularly for Suez Canal, this particular incident, we understand that it's mainly impacted by this weather, right? It's a storm, sandstorm that result this caused this blockage in the first place. So in terms of technology, or in terms of Alibaba technology, something we can help to mitigate the impact of supply chain disruption for this type of natural disaster or nature weather changes is that we can have two things, right? First is prevention, and the second one will be the medication. The prevention, I would say that things like AI technologies can be used for certain things like weather forecasting or vehicle route planning to see whether to predict if there is a weather change or there's a sandstorm at certain place at a certain place. These type of things, although not 100% accurate, but this can be still can be done. And the AI technology is improving every day. Weather forecasting is become more and more accurate as we see nowadays in the technology, right? In terms of medication, like I said before, vehicle route planning, AI dispatching are both two types of solutions that Alibaba Cloud is actually using for this type of supply chain disruption or to prevent or mitigate the logistic supply chain disruptions, right? So these solutions are actually being used in our own ecosystem in Alibaba Cloud. For example, our Ele.me, which is a food delivery branch business unit in the Alibaba Cloud China, as well as Cainiao, which is our logistic branch, right? So both of them are actually using our AI dispatching and VRP, vehicle route planning solutions. And these two solutions actually utilize of AI technology and big data to do the demand forecasting, as well as we do integrate with weather forecasting as well, and plan the best route for the different vehicles to dispatch products. Yeah.
All right, so we talked a little bit about supply chain disruptions. I'd like to broaden it out a little and maybe speak to digital transformation in general within the logistics industry and specifically around supply chains. Nidhi, any great examples you can share as we shine the spotlight on companies that are doing something really exemplary in this regard?
Yeah, absolutely. That's happy to talk about from our experiences. So we're working currently with one of the largest F&B companies, which sells, wine, beer, etc., globally and distributes it globally. And they have maybe volumes of upwards of a couple of hundreds of thousands of containers moving around the world at any time. And how they had been managing that is really using Excel sheets. So they were basically having logistics teams who were looking at the containers and how they're moving, checking each container's delay or arrival on the shipping company's website, and then filling that in an Excel and guiding their operations teams, the customs authorities, the warehousing teams, and the customers, retailers through that process. I mean, you can imagine the amount of manual effort that goes into it, the error that can happen, and the reactiveness of the whole process. And having worked for one of the largest logistics companies, visibility has not been a new thing. I mean, we've talked about control towers for quite a while, but they've still been very manual. They've been manned by people who've been entering data, picking up the phone and calling up different shipping companies or logistics operators or trucking companies and putting that data in. And I think that's what's been reality so far, or still is, for even the largest Fortune 500 companies. The good news is that we have 10x data out there. We know exactly what the geospatial data tells us about where a ship is, where a plane is, what's the weather around it. We can use technologies that Ken talked about in terms of even forecasting the weather. We can look at real routes of how these assets are moving. What's the shipping company saying? What's the port saying? So I think the good news is that there is 10x data out there. The important thing is how we get this in an automated fashion, make it speak the same language, and then use intelligent technologies like machine learning or AI to make supply chain visibility more predictive. So not just looking into the rearview mirror about what happened last Chinese New Year or what happened last Christmas or what's been the pattern so far in our supply chains and making decisions based on that, but really using this real-time information and making the supply chain visibility more predictive. And the other aspect to that is really using APIs to integrate different data points, different prediction algorithms into one standard platform, into one visibility product. So I think that's the kind of best practice that we see for companies who have massive volumes of cargo moving across the world. Being able to have that one interface where they can really control all of the risks and exceptions that are going to happen. And the beauty of technology as it stands today is that it does not limit itself to these large players. Even a small trader or a small manufacturer who has only a few, sort of tens or hundreds of containers moving around the planet can still use such technology. So I think that's kind of the best practice, and that's what we see becoming an urgent need.
I want to get Ken's take because he gets to talk to logistics companies every day, work with them on their projects. And Ken, you likely have a great perspective on who's doing something special when it comes to digital transformation as it relates to the supply chain. Give us some examples.
Yeah, actually, I have quite a lot of examples to give, but let's begin with what Nidhi say about even some big companies are still use very traditional things to keep track of data like Excel. But there are also some companies already did the digital transformation to having a supply chain management system across their organization, right? For example, using SAP, things like that. It greatly reduced for example, like the buoy effect from like a warehouse to warehouse and into the last mile to customer. But the main problem here was nowadays, currently what we see is the difference between different organizations, to upstream organization or downstream organization, their system integration, because there is a problem nowadays, right? So although there's tons of APIs, but they are pretty much silo. Those systems are having their own sets of data set. They are different. So how do they interact with each other? That's one problem currently we are trying to solve with our customer as well. So what we see something interesting around the region is we see some of the big players, for example, some shipping company in Singapore, they are doing something called consortium of porters, right? They create something like a portal and consolidate many data sets together and provide a unified APIs for the different players to consume, different logistic companies consume. So this type of data set are pretty much unified in terms of parameters, so all the systems can use and interact with each other easily. That's something interesting I'm seeing. And furthermore, I want to bring up one very very interesting. Some of my customer is actually doing is in terms of 3D printing. Is in terms of digital transformation, I believe this is one disruptive technology that's bringing into the logistic industry, is that the last mile of delivery is not through the shipping, but instead using digital files, digital format of the product to the customer or to the last mile 3D printers to print the different parts of the component, the goods. Then the customer will do the assembly themselves. So this reduce a lot of logistic management in between. So I believe in the next few maybe decades or 10 years, this will be something that is going to disrupt the whole logistic digital transformation. Yeah,
I got to say, 3D printing, I did not think that was going to be something you were going to introduce to the conversation. So that's a really unexpected and good example. Let's come back to this notion of gaining better supply chain visibility. Nidhi, can you talk us through some of the challenges that you see in this regard?
We're in Asia here. Asia is kind of the factory of the world. The consumption is really happening in the European and the American markets, and that's been just how the world has behaved. So, there is bound to be a global nature of transportation, and the challenge or the barrier it brings when we talk about visibility is that you need that one solution to cover all geographies or to cover all modes of transport, or to cover various data aspects that can cause risks. So I think that those three are for the biggest barriers to adopting supply chain visibility. Do we have global coverage? Do we have coverage across all modes of transport? And are we able to pick in data any kind of data that we need necessary for visibility. So I think companies have really looked at sort of very detailed assessments in terms of ticking all these boxes before they embark on a visibility solution. And I think what we've seen when we work with companies is that the success comes from small experiments. There is no one solution that can fit the entire supply chain globally. I think companies can't wait for perfection globally. So they can start experimenting, and that's the true nature of technology. When we talk about machine learning or artificial intelligence, it learns over time. It learns from the kind of supply chain, the kind of data that's fed in, kind of geographies or trade routes that it's looking at, and it improves over time. So I think these barriers can be overcome by starting experiments in smaller geographies or in smaller modes. Let's say pick one mode like ocean transportation mode. You can still find technologies which capture all kinds of data, get the global coverage, but focus on one mode. That's an experiment that can once it succeeds, then you can sort of replicate it in the other modes of transport. So I think that's one of the major suggestions that we've seen based on working with customers. The other is that, of course, when we talk about data, the data has to come from different parties in the ecosystem. So sharing of data across players, be it shippers, be it logistics companies, or the asset owners like the shipping lines and the air cargo operators, all of that data somehow needs to come into place. So the faster we get standard data definitions, today it even varies between any two shipping companies, for example. So the faster we get standard data definitions, the faster we can talk about technology adoption in terms of visibility.
So we've got a couple of industry visionaries in this discussion, and I've got to ask you about the future. Ken, I'm going to start with you. When we think about machine learning, which Nidhi just introduced to the conversation, we think about big data analytics. Where do we see logistics companies taking these two technologies? What is the future of innovation in this space? And how are you at Alibaba Cloud helping to enable that?
Yeah, so in terms of machine learning and big data analytics, it's two very hot technology nowadays in not just logistics, but in every industry I'm seeing. Yeah, so but particularly in logistics, and it's been done a while. For example, the solutions Alibaba Cloud is providing, the vehicle route planning solution we have for our Cainiao, and also the AI dispatch, right? So basically what it does is using big data to do AI forecasting of demands, and also to do AI forecasting of route planning for the vehicles, dispatch vehicles. So this has been done for quite a while, but we are actually trying to improve the algorithms, improve the technology to make it more accurate. Yeah, that's one part. And in the other hand, in terms of AI, machine learning portion, we are starting to have, in Alibaba Cloud, we're starting to see products like technologies like unmanned vehicles. We call it the Xiaomanlü vehicles. It's already experimented in China, some of the university campus. We are using it to deliver our Taobao products to them, to the students using that. So this is also something hot. Or if you see on the Netflix Black Mirror, there's already have things like unmanned vehicles walking around the streets to deliver goods. So this is something big will be in the future that technology can help in terms of machine learning and data analytics. For Alibaba Cloud, we also have one example customer. We having one project we done is with a Singapore local postal company. We provide them with a uniform platform to visualize their data, right? So big data is everywhere. So we need something to help them visualize their data in a single dashboard, right? So this Alibaba Cloud can also provide. So one of the project we did with them is like we have a single dashboard to help them see the aggregation of their track delivery status, and also their demands and forecasting, things like that, right, in one single dashboard. Yeah, to help them with
I'm hearing so much about information management and visibility into data and gaining insights, which is incredibly exciting. Nidhi, I'm going to give you the last word here. Take us 2-3 years into the future. What do you see happening where technology and logistics business problems intersect? What's your forecast for where the market is heading?
Yeah, that's a great question, John. So I think, when I think of sort of tying it back to the first question that you asked about, what just happened with Suez Canal, um, and what I mentioned about 10x data already being out there, I think these hundreds of data points that we have, these are growing exponentially. With every single asset, be it a truck or a ship or a plane moving across the world, with every single incident that's happening, this data set about what's happening in the environment is growing exponentially. And it's making it humanly impossible for us to use the historical technologies. And that's where machine learning and AI comes in, because it constantly learns, constantly looks at these changes that are happening, and then tries to find impact and make logistics more efficient. So I actually see, if I look a little bit ahead into the future, I actually see three things happening. One, I think in terms of efficiency, the example that I gave today, when we're as a consumer, if we're traveling around in a city, we know exactly when we're going to arrive, and we can quantify it down to the second now. And more often than not, it's completely accurate, and it's dynamic. It's changing based on how risks are happening. The same thing at a global scale, to have predictive visibility, but then to translate that into prescriptive meaning. So what's the impact on costs? What's the impact on CO2 emissions? How do I manage this risk? If the cargo is stuck in Singapore, how do I get it out of Singapore? So making it more prescriptive is going to be the future of control towers. So that's one. The second thing that I see happening is, again, if we take inference from another industry, let's say airlines, and passenger movement that's happening in airlines, there is dynamic pricing. Like if we're buying a ticket for flying out tomorrow versus around Christmas, the pricing changes dynamically, because there are sophisticated algorithms around demand supply management, capacity that's existing, and how the pricing should be changing. And that's what airlines have been using since a couple of decades, since American Airlines introduced it. The same thing does not exist in logistics, both in the air cargo as well as the sea cargo space. So there are teams of pricing teams sitting there figuring out manually what's the price going to be for a certain cargo or container moving along these assets. And that's where efficiency again comes in. So making demand forecasting more intelligent, fitting that into planning scenarios related to capacity, and making pricing more dynamic. So I think I actually see the link between what we've learned from the passenger space in movement of people coming to the cargo space. And then the third thing that I see related to all this is that the roles of people working in such logistics organizations are going to change. So it's no longer about data entry, calling up someone, figuring out what's the problem with the cargo, but it's really about acting upon it, taking sort of decisions around how do we manage these disruptions. So that's going to be about the change in the kind of people we would need, the kind of roles that we would see in organizations. So those are kind of the three things that I see would be very real in the near future.
Well, I got to say, it is certainly an exciting time for this industry. Really appreciate the insights, Nidhi from Portcast, Ken from Alibaba Cloud. Thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you, John.
And thank you to everybody who's joined us for the latest edition of Digital Beats. I'm John Panker. So long for now.